One thing that the makers of Prehistoric Planet seem keenly aware of is that repetition can be a detriment, so they tend to vary things as much as possible. So while the first episode focused on coasts, and was largely dominated by cool blue colors, here we go to the opposite extreme, the warm yellows and oranges of the desert. In some ways, Episode 1 was an unusual first impression for the series. Specifically, for a show largely focused on dinosaurs, there was only one species of dinosaur in it, not counting birds that pop up in the background. If that was a problem for some viewers, it's certainly rectified in Episode 2, which is jam-packed with them. Episode 2 continues the series' trend of starting off strong, with a massive spectacle that hooks the attention of the viewer immediately. We pan up over a barren, windswept landscape, with a herd of animals visible on the horizon. We get a better look at these titans as the camera cuts to a closer shot with the herd of giants obscured by a rippling veil of heat rising from the sun-baked earth. The inspiration from modern documentaries about elephants is easy to see. The hard percussion helps to emphasize their size and majesty as the camera cuts ever closer and closer. The caution as we approach them helps to emphasize their power and dignity. These are Dreadnoughtus, the so-called fears-nothing dinosaur, an apt name for these creatures as they stride confidently and proudly across the desert. This is a herd of males, returning to their breeding grounds where a huge collection of females awaits them. The males display to the females by inflating a series of pneumatic air sacs running along the undersides of their necks, accompanied by deep, booming calls. But the competition is fierce. An older bull who's already staked his claim challenges one of the new arrivals. The show savors the anticipation to their confrontation. First, they display to one another, but when neither backs down, they approach one another, sizing each other up, circling one another with menacing glares. They rock back on their hind legs and lean against each other for additional support. The first blows are more investigatory, with both males getting an idea for how strong the other is. Finally, the fight begins in earnest. Rearing once more, each bull throws his weight at his opponent, slamming their necks against each other with earth-shattering force. The younger, more colorful male is clearly more aggressive, curling his neck back and whipping his head at the other. He rakes the older male with his teeth, and punches him with the large thumb claw on his forefeet. At last, the fearsome challenger knocks the other bull back, and he collapses onto his side. Gentle giants, these are not. An overhead crossfade time-lapse shows the true cost of this clash of the titans. As time passes, more and more of the Dreadnoughtus disperse, but the defeated male never gets back up. A solemn and tasteful way to communicate his passing, with the final shot showing him alone and lifeless, taking place in the darkest part of the night. This is probably my favorite segment from the series so far. It best utilizes all of the show's strengths, perfectly weaving story, science, and spectacle. Once again, the personality and motivation of both dinosaurs is evident to see without resorting to anthropomorphization. They snarl ferociously at each other, letting out unnerving hisses like monstrous swans. Each blow carries the weight of several tons, and it shows. When the old bull falls to his defeat, I felt truly sorry for him, despite having only met him just a few minutes prior. Despite the obvious similarities to the fights between bull-elephant seals, the series took more direct inspiration from prairie chickens, including the display structures and the makeup of the breeding colony. Still, there is clearly some inspiration from elephant seals as well, which I'm guessing led to some discussion among the artists and producers about how bloody to make the fight. It's no secret that elephant seal fights can be as bloody as any slasher movie, and the use of blood in the scene would have definitely helped to communicate both the stakes of the fight as well as the brutality. But I'm sure they erred on the side of caution given the desire to appeal to kids, and I can't fault them too much for that. I personally would have loved to see something vicious and gory, but I can understand their decision. If there's any problem with this scene, it's that it is the highlight of the episode in terms of spectacle, so nothing else we see really lives up to it. Not to say that the following segments aren't great in their own right. In fact, I think overall this episode does a better job at handling the distribution of segments than the first one. Segments vary more in terms of the conflicts presented, and they blend into one another more naturally, whereas transitions in coasts sometimes felt abrupt. Moving from South America to Asia, we focus on a long-dead, long-rotten sauropod carcass, with huge Ashdarchids circling overhead. But the available food is surprisingly untouched, and we can see why. 4 Tarbosaurus are sleeping nearby, and nobody wants to be the first to try grabbing a bite. But their presence here attracts flies, and the flies attract lizards, and these lizards provide the framework for the segment. It's unexpected, but it perfectly mirrors other segments from other BBC documentaries showing lizards doing the same thing with lions today. It's an unusual and effective framing device. The lizards perform amusing acrobatics to catch their prey, but their presence here attracts the attention of a pair of velociraptor. There is a double layer of tension here, for the lizards being preyed upon by the velociraptor, but also for the velociraptor that must avoid waking the sleeping giants. One of the lizards quickly darts beneath one of the Tarbosaurus, and the careless velociraptor collides head first into its side. The animation is great. You can see the velociraptor realizing the mistake it's made just a hair too late to stop. The Tarbosaurus lazily sweeps its head around to snap at the velociraptor, which don't push their luck and quickly leave the area. The other Tarbosaurus look up to see what the commotion is about, and the nonplussed group decides to move on. Appearing in silhouette against the low-hanging sun, they leave the carcass, and the lizard looks on, positively sulking at seeing this movable feast walking away. The pterosaurs at least get to land and partake of what's left of the dead sauropod. We stay in the deserts of the Nemet as we move on to the adorable and whimsically bizarre mononycus. A great deal of care and attention was clearly paid to its design. It's given facial discs and coloration reminiscent of a barn owl, and the discovery of a developed hyoid bone in the closely related Shibuya hints at the presence of a long prehensile tongue. It's this tongue that is the highlight of Mononychus's time in the limelight. A single female finds an old dried-out log. She uses her directional hearing to detect the presence of termites within. Using her eponymous claw, she cuts her way inside, and then uses her tongue to slurp up supper. The animation on the tongue is superb, looking exactly like footage of anteaters and echidnas. The only downside of this part is that, as the mononychus shows her claw, there is this ridiculous scraping metal sound. It absolutely does not fit with anything we've yet seen in the show, and really should have been taken out. But we're not done with Mononychus. She hunkers down as a sudden rainstorm befalls the desert, which blooms to colorful, radiant life as flowers blossom in the temporary oasis. The small creature is positively overwhelmed by the sudden transformation, as well as all the potential meals it brings out. She tries her claw on a scorpion and some enantiornithines before finally finding a decent meal. While these two segments don't quite fit perfectly together, I think it was a wise decision to focus on the Mononychus more, which has a lot of character and is extremely endearing. Both Jon Favreau and Mike Gunton have cited it as their favorite dinosaur, and it's clear to see that in its execution. Spending more time with the animals in this episode is definitely one of its strengths compared to coasts. Mononychus appear in the next segment as well, with a series of small bodies of water forming in the midst of the desert, drawing numerous animals from miles around. We follow a herd of Barsboldia as they make their way to the watering hole, which is surrounded by ankylosaurs, smaller sauropods, and even Therizinosaurus. But the largest visitors are the so-called Mongolian Titan, an unknown sauropod whose presence here is inferred from a single unidentified footprint. Mononychus darts curiously between the columnar legs of the Titan, visually showcasing the great disparity in shapes and sizes that dinosaurs can attain. There is one final arrival to the water, a lone Tarbosaurus. The music makes the scene tense, and there's a definite sense of trepidation in the eyes of the herbivores as they watch the giant predator make its way toward them. But it largely ignores them, with its main priority being to get a drink of water. Nonetheless, the others all give it a wide berth. More than one person has noted that there are definitely some similarities between this scene and the scene from Jon Favreau's Jungle Book, where the tiger Shere Khan approaches the dwindling water supply. We finally move from Mongolia back to North Africa to meet a familiar face from the previous episode. Barbaradactylus gather on tall cliffs to display. Males with large antlered crests show off and occasionally do battle with one another for breeding rights. In one shocking moment, one male slams into another, knocking him against the rocks and careening to a nasty end. If this was the end of the scene, I'd fault it for being too similar to the Dreadnoughtus scene. But then it takes a surprising and fascinating turn. Attenborough then tells us about a phenomenon called sexual mimicry, where there are males that look more like females and use this trait to increase their chances of finding a mate. The larger, dominant males largely pay the gender benders little mind, and in fact mistake them for potential mates, in which case the smaller males can simply reject them as any other female would. While the dominant male has trouble finding a mate, the so-called sneak finds more luck. While larger antlered males may be more attractive, females will still mate with as many males as they can to increase the likelihood of their reproductive success. When the feminine male and his partner court one another, they bob their heads and even kiss in a manner similar to modern albatross. This is an excellent bit of behavior to showcase. It's new and unexpected, and is exactly the kind of behavior I was hoping the series would show. While Episode 1 was great overall, it was mostly standard fare for this type of program in terms of the behaviors on display. Swimming T-Rex and pebble-swallowing elasmosaurs may come as a surprise to many general audiences, but seasoned paleo fans will be very familiar with such concepts. But the idea of a male pterosaur that appears more like a female and uses this trait as a means of attracting a mate is something I've never seen in paleo art before. It's a fantastic bit of informed speculation based on widespread examples across the animal kingdom. This is what I'm most excited for future episodes. For the final segment, we follow a herd of Caesurnosaurus who live amidst vast gypsum dunes in the heart of Brazil. The towering dunes of snow-white minerals make for an amazing spectacle, and I do wonder if there's geologic evidence for the presence of gypsum dunes in this environment. This is more of a traditional dinosaur narrative, with the herd traveling great distances through the arid wasteland in search of food and water. They navigate using the stars and infrasound, and after a long and arduous journey, they reach the coast, where there is a small pocket of food supported by moisture from the fog. The hadrosaurs are even shown licking their skin to collect the condensed water. Like the previous episode, this one ends on a note of optimism and relief as the herd enjoys the fruits of their struggle. Not a bad segment, but it felt a little rushed. For a story like this to work, we really need to feel the length and hardship of the journey. But the segment is too short to truly share in the experience of the Caesurnosaurus dealing with these problems, and the whole thing ends fairly abruptly, not wholly allowing us to savor the relief of their victory. Perhaps if we had started with the Caesurnosaurus as they head out into the midst of the gypsum dunes at the beginning of the episode, and then ended on their arrival to the coast, it would feel more like a complete story, having gone through our own journey through the deserts, so to speak. Episode 2 improves on the first episode in pretty much every way. The episode feels overall more focused, the segments feel less disjointed and more fleshed out, with a stronger sense of connection between them. The characters have even more personality, and the imagery is just as stunning. As I said, the Dreadnoughtus scene is my favorite for sheer spectacle, but the mononycus is extremely endearing, and the Tarbosaurus makes a fantastic impression despite limited screen time. Final rating, 4.6 out of 5. I can only hope that the trajectory of the series' quality continues in this direction, but we'll have to wait and see. Thanks as always for watching, and please let me know in the comments your thoughts on the show. Do you think I'm being too positive? Do you see flaws that I don't? Or are you just as hyped as I am? Either way, I'd love to know. Join me next time when we quench our thirst from the deserts with a nice drink of fresh water.